Yemi Penn, welcome to Roll with the Punches.
Ooh, roll with the punches. You ain't playing with that title, are you? I'm ready. Let's go.
Mate, I'm so bloody excited. I was just having a little, like I said to you when you popped on my screen, I was having a little Yemi Penn refresher and I got as excited going back over all of the stuff that you do as I was when Fudge first introduced us. Shout out to Fudge. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're an amazing woman. And the thing is, I was like, I just like to go in and have a quick snapshot, not know too much so that it can all come out in the conversation. But I jump over to your page and I'm like, okay, you've got this incredible backstory that covers a lot of stuff. And then I'm like, and what does she do now? And you've got all these different businesses in all these different locations, but if that's not enough, they're all in different industries. And you're a mum.
Oh my gosh.
And you're a speaker and you're an author. And I just went, like, I've got my pen and paper and I'm ready to be schooled by you, Yemi. I'm ready to be
I love
schooled.
it. You know what? I need to sit with the psychology. As you were saying it all out, I'm cringing. And I'm wondering why I'm cringing. So I've got some work to do afterwards, evidently. But yeah,
I love that.
how interesting.
Oh, what do you think the cringe came from?
There was always a girl or a boy in school who was disliked because they were either too smart or too pretty or too something. And I think I've put it to that. I think I've put it to, there's just too many things going on, Yemi. No one's going to think that's normal. You really don't want to be a target. Back down. That's the voice going on in my head. And I've never been able to put words to it until now. So thank you.
Oh, I love this. Do you know what? I had a funny, this is so irrelevant, but relevant at the same time and interesting. So this morning or last night, I can't remember. Time just, we're at a standstill anyway. So what does it matter what time of day it is?
Exactly. It's that time.
I've been doing a bit of therapy myself recently after a fairly, bit of a killer podcast that brought a whole new, style of therapy into my realm. So I've been doing that lately and it goes back into a lot of childhood stuff and I know that we'll cover a bit of that today. But what was really interesting is I moved house recently and I was looking through old photos and this photo came up and I've put it up before, not even all that long ago. This photo, a school photo of me standing there in my school uniform with pigtails and a fringe and a big freckly nose, not a big nose, but big freckles on my nose. And I posted it and I was like, but it wouldn't melt. But for the first time, Yemi, I looked and I opened the picture and I blew it up and I just stared at it. And for the first time in my life, I looked into that little girl's eyes and I went, I don't know, like, what a beautiful, beautiful little girl. And I cared and I just wondered about her and I thought, and it was weird, right? It's weird because we do the work and we do the stuff and half the time, I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but half the time there's analytical me in the middle of therapy sessions going, this is kind of bloody weird. What even is this? Is this doing anything? What is this doing? What are we doing here? Like, that's weird.
What are we doing? Yeah. Why am I talking about a past? And why does that matter? And why am I doing? Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. So that was and then it's those little moments where you could pick up a photo you've looked at 1,000 times and you feel differently about yourself. And you're like, that's me.
Yeah.
And I feel differently. Anyway, God, didn't we go deep quickly?
Right? We haven't even touched the surface.
God, buckle up, guys. It's going to be a ride today. Tell me, take the stage, Yemi. Tell me about your upbringing, your story.
This is an interesting one because I still try to find the words to make it land really smooth on whoever's ears listen. So I'm a British born Nigerian living in Sydney, Australia. That's the quick summary. And there's always going to be a story attached to that. So I was born in the UK. There were always really great relations between Nigeria in particular and the UK. And so my mum and dad traveled back and forth, and they would have probably had some foresight that at some point we might want to live in the UK. But I actually grew up in Nigeria. So a big part of my childhood was there. I lived with my grandmum, you know, being of African descent, indigenous African communities was all about the village. It takes a village to raise a child. You never just have mum and dad. I mean, I think back then and even now in certain cultures, that it's absolutely ridiculous to expect two people to look after a child or two children or three. It's a village. They're fully aware that you've got to come together. And now I'm appreciating it more. So I guess when I answer this question, it's with a completely different lens. So I grew up with my grandmum, moved a few times, and then eventually, you know, relocated to the UK in, I want to say 1993 or 94. So I continued secondary school there. So I started secondary school in Nigeria and continued in the UK. And I would have effectively stayed there till I moved to Japan in 2012. So, and now I'm in Australia. So I guess the point is I've got this nomadic blood in me. I think the idea of moving is a big deal. You know, I'm one of seven, but really grew up with six. With five. So there were six of us together, you know, for a concentrated period of time. But have always and still do have this love relationship with Nigeria and West Africa. But then London is where I formed a lot of friendships that are still with me today. And Sydney, Australia has been home for 7 years. And I couldn't think of more sacred land to be on.
Wow, you're like the polar opposite to me. I grew up in Tassie, and then my biggest move was hitting the turf in Melbourne. And you know, speak to someone like you, and I go, what must it feel like to have all those different cultures colliding and these homes across the globe? Like, you've got these homes that are settled places that you've lived and that you've created a home in completely different places of the globe.
It's the thing I don't think we give enough time to. I mean, I know not everyone's fortunate enough to be able to travel, but to have that richness, and I know it's a word we completely overuse, but we have to keep using it until we get to a place of balance, is that rich diversity. It's that rich understanding of how other people live. It's also learning the history behind it. Yes. So for me, it's been gold. Now, I didn't think that's what I was doing back then, but now I get it. I mean, I really don't like flying. I don't like going on planes because I'm not the one flying the plane. I usually like to interview the pilot, right? I'm like, let me just ask the pilot, you know, how long you've been flying this thing, mate? But because I want to see the world and experience it, I work through my fear and I get on a plane. So I think what I've realized is that I'm really interested in knowing people or experiences different to me. It's the best way we get to understand the world. It's the best way we get to tolerate, to empathize, to sympathize. So it's been an amazing blessing that I don't take for granted.
Oh, I love that. That resonates with my last 12 months, even just sitting behind this mic. The world that I am now a part of is so different through the lenses that I now see it through. I'd love to hop back, even just a year ago. I'd love to hop back inside the mind that was mine then, and remember what the world looked and felt like, and what opportunities were available, and the way that I saw things, because it's just changed. And the problem is, a big thing that's on my mind lately a lot is this idea of privilege that we always have our eyes closed to. I recently watched Filthy Rich and Homeless, which is a series where they put 6 or 7 wealthy people from Australia out to live homeless for 10 days. So they had a couple of nights on the street, a couple of nights in crisis accommodation. Then they got put back on the street and buddied up with a real homeless person. And so they'd interviewed these people before putting them out, really wealthy people. And, you know, there were snapshots of them saying, as we all would, You know, I would walk past homeless people on the street. I wouldn't look twice. They'd remain invisible. You know, they'd come and ask me for something, and I'd just walk past like they weren't there. And then
Yes.
snippets of them saying, if I hit rock bottom, I'd just get a job and I'd just build myself back up. You know, like these opinions that we have, and then you put them in the situation. And this is where there's hope that you're only here for 10 days. This is like a bit of a game, really. But how quickly their story changed, and they broke down, and they realised yep. I mean, we're privileged. Even when I look at what I've built in this podcast, and I look at the life that I have, and I've worked really hard for it, but I'm also privileged. I was privileged to be in a position where I had the strength and the support and the love and the resources to start at the platform I started on. So
I love that self-awareness, because you're right, to a certain extent we're all privileged. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, okay, so what do we do with that? I think our privilege is what should allow us to wear the shoes of other people. I think if we have privilege, that's one thing we've firstly got to acknowledge it. And having privilege doesn't mean you're snooty and you're born with a silver spoon. I think people get it wrong. It's just in certain contexts. I've got privilege because I was able to get an education, a really good education at that. You know, on top of that, most of the UK, well, via our taxes, paid for my education. Yes, I paid a certain amount, but and that's a certain privilege. And so I usually think, when we have a privilege over a group of people that didn't have it, what can we do to help them? What can we do? And that's really important. So I don't know what you're doing, but you got me. This is like some self-therapy I'm going through with these questions. So.
The worst thing is I haven't even got to your story or anything yet. I'm just pulling stuff out of my head that's been bouncing around, because sitting in front of you's drawn it out. The other thing I thought just this morning, and then we're going to hear about your story, but I don't know whether I was just thinking, or I was listening to something, or I was communicating with someone, but at some point this idea of not being smart, I think there was a topic that I was looking at that I didn't know much about, that most people would, and this instant idea of not being smart, or I'm not smart enough, or I don't know it. And then I was like, what even is smart, right? What is smart? Smart is, because smart is not intelligence. There's intelligence. There's our intelligence. Smart is because I have the ability to learn. I'm a very good learner. I'm intelligent. I have a lot of knowledge. So if you come and ask me about the things I know about, I'm really smart. But if you ask me something that most people know about that I've never shown an interest enough to actually outwardly go and check it out and learn it, then all of a sudden I'm not smart. And I'm like, smart's a really dumb word, isn't it? Really?
Smart's a really dumb word. That's got to be a t-shirt. Smart's a really dumb word.
So what's your definition of smart?
Oh man. You know what, I usually have an answer for everything, but it almost doesn't matter what I say, because it's going to be my definition, which is going to be different from yours.
Right.
And so if someone, I don't, because it would drive me mad. Because if I go with the definition of what I believed smart was, it was to get that A star, get that 70%, get that IQ, all of that. But how can that be the only measure of smart? There's got to be other ways. I mean, bloody, I cannot get enough of Survivor. And there are some real smart people who aren't necessarily academic.
Right.
There's some real smart people who are academic but have no idea how to balance on a beam. So it depends. Like what is smart? It's a very good point. But man, that would drive me nuts trying to figure it out.
I'm not smart enough to figure it out yet. All right, tell us more about you, more about your story.
Oh man, we could go everywhere. What would you want to know? I think I wouldn't know where to begin.
All right.
When people listen to this, what? Because then I can go off if I know the value I can add.
Yeah, I guess I'd love a bit of a snapshot of some of the big stuff that you've had to deal with, that big stuff that sits underneath who we are as an identity. And then, because I want to reflect that to what you do now and how, you know, that how you've come through that, what the big rocks you've learned are. Because you've got it on both sides. I could say, hey, let's look at your adversities, let's look at your trauma, and we could do a whole podcast on that. And then I could say, let's look at your success, and we could do a whole podcast on that, and both would be interesting. I'd love a little bit of pulling each of those out.
Okay, you want a little bit of everything. All right, I see. I
want it all, Yemi. All of it.
Okay. I mean, I love that question. What are the big things? You know, there are probably two. I think when I truly started to come into what I'm going to call my awakening, and my awakening, it was and is, hold up. This is not what I signed up for. And if this is what I was told to sign up for, then I'm calling BS on this. Because I tried to do the go to university, get a good degree, fall in love, 2.4 kids, white picket fence, good job, retire at 65 when my back is no longer as strong. And then what, live life then? Nah. So I call BS on that. I think about probably about 6 years ago. And so for me, that was a big part, but it's so linked to the other big thing, because calling BS on what I call the memo, that's what I call the memo, was linked to my trauma and the constant reiterating of my trauma. And for me, I think one big part, even though I believe, so trauma for me, as I define in my TED Talk, is trauma is a distressing or disturbing event. So when you think about it, most of us will have gone through it. What did we do as a result of it? But my traumatic incidences, of which one was childhood, and it was loss of power, sexual power in this instance, as a child, where someone abused theirs. It took away literally my voice. It took away my reasoning. It took away my understanding of how the world is to operate. There are still so many things I'm trying to figure out. But that would have triggered so many other things I would have done in life. So here I am in Australia 7 years ago with a 7-month-old baby and a 7-year-old daughter. And I'm on the brink of divorce to the father of my son, who is different to the father of my daughter. So as you can tell, I am really royally fudging up this whole thing called life. And it was until I stopped to look at it, because I was operating in shame. I mean, truth be told, I moved to Australia 100% to hide from the ridicule, to hide from the shame, to hide from anybody knowing me. I just wanted to start again without needing to take my life in order to start again. And that's, I don't even know where those words came from, but I think that's what we need to start giving to people as an option. You can start again without needing to take your life. No matter how much you think you are failing, you have failed. This is the first time I've expressed the fact that how broken I felt without twitching and being uncomfortable. I'm getting more comfortable with it. And I usually challenge people if they want to judge me by saying, tell me how right you're getting it, because what is right? And so for me, that was a really big point, was realizing that I was following a memo I didn't receive. And even if I did receive that memo, it doesn't apply to me because I've got a different life. So we've all got to write our own. We've got to write our own. And then there's the spiritual side of me that says, okay, if you all write your own, you just have to believe that it will work out for the good of humanity, society. We're so separated that I think we forget, if we just live in our truth, create our own memo, figure out our purpose, do the work, then everything will work out. But that was a pivotal moment for me when I realized, but I only realized that I didn't want to follow the memo. I wanted to create my own memo when I started looking at my trauma, when I started going to therapy. And I couldn't afford it back then because I was on a single parent income. I was on good money. It was a 6-figure, which sounds great, but I wanted to travel. Like, I wanted to travel. Why don't I get to travel? Because I'm a single mom. Screw that. Change it. And that was when I started to realize, okay, we can actually change things. But I realized I was only going to change it if I looked at my trauma. And a lot of us don't even acknowledge we've gone through something traumatic.
Was that something, sorry to interrupt, was that something that you kept to yourself up until this recent point of going to seek therapy, or was that something that you were open about at the time? Or
Yeah, no, I was never open, but when I now recollect, I would tell people. So I never mentioned it to my family and my siblings as teenagers. I would have mentioned it when it happened, the memory I have when it happened, because it happened a number of times when I was 7, but I would have kept quiet. And then I would go into relationships. So this is coming up in, I'll be sharing more of this in my next documentary. And I would share it with partners, but then I wouldn't know why I was telling them. And I believe I was telling them because I wanted to say, please see me as more than just this. Please honor me. And I think that's why I was saying it. So I would have said it to a few people, but it would have never been wide. I mean, the real time I felt I truly spoke about it was when I wrote it in my book. And then when I wrote it in my book, which was published last year, and then I would have people messaging saying, oh my gosh, I know someone, this happened to me. And I just thought, why are we all quiet about it? If we really want this to stop, why are we quiet? And then it snowballed from there. It snowballed. The minute I said, yes, I will talk about this and I'll do it with compassion, was when the opportunities came for me to stand on stages and to create my own platforms. And that's made a difference. And it's only going to get more, but I'm going to do it with compassion. First, compassion for self, and then compassion for others.
Tell me the strengths, the things that came from that trauma and that experience that you wouldn't hand back no matter what. Tell me the good stuff.
Yeah. And
then tell me some of the biggest struggles that it brought you up against.
Oh, I love that. I guess what you're saying is almost the whole premise of my pain to power. I believe in our pain as power. Yes. I believe it wholeheartedly. I don't have anything scientific to put for it, but I think it's so linked. I think we go through stuff which, when you're in it, you're not going to want to hear it, and I get that. But the minute you come out for air, there's got to be something. The best thing that's come from it is finding my voice. I say this with as much humility as possible, but for someone who was reserved and shy back then, because if I told people, uncle's doing this to me, he's making me do this and that, people didn't listen. So at some point you stop talking. At some point you stop speaking up when you see injustices, because you've already got a skewed version of the world. So the good that's come from this is finding my voice. And that sounds like a nice program that, say, a Tony Robbins would put on, finding my voice. But really, it really is finding my voice, because now when I speak, even I get goosebumps. And I'm thinking, I could have silenced her. Can you imagine if I'd stayed silent? And I'm not saying stay silent or make noise and being rah, rah, rah in the streets. Everybody's different. I'm not trying to downplay anybody. Some people want to respond in anger, and I get that. I know where that comes from. But I do think that rage comes in the place where grief didn't happen. And so for me, grieving was really important, but it took me a while. And I still grieve. And I might still grieve for a while, because I realized when I had one of my therapy sessions that I could only really cry for 7-year-old Yemi. I couldn't cry for 37-year-old Yemi then. So why could I only cry for a little girl and not me? So, and I think the evolution, the transformation is just so sweet. It's so much sweeter than staying in the victim story. And I want people to know that. So that's definitely been the positives. The downside is just almost the opposite of that. The lack of self-worth. I mean, when people fight for their limitations, well, this happened to me in the past, and so therefore I don't trust anybody. I don't trust my ex-husband, my ex-wife, my ex-partner did this, that person. It took a different energy from me. I was in victim mode in relationships, not suggesting that people hadn't done things that I wouldn't have liked, but I was playing for the wrong team. It was draining. And as a result, I was really good at attracting the real shit stuff.
Yeah.
And so but that was also attached exceptionally to self-worth. You know, I think a lot of us, but most of us don't even realize it. I mean, you could have the most confident person walking in the street, looking confident person, but heavily insecure. You imagine that real confident person strutting that pinstripe suit, but then they come back home and they might be abusive to a partner. That's all insecurity. So although you go out there, it's insecure. Why would you ever need to dominate another human being? There is something that you feel you do not have control over. And so therefore, the only way to do it, because you can see it in the embodiment of somebody else, is that. I never went to that extreme. However, I can understand why people do. But it was all self-worthiness. That was the downside. And I still work on it. I think it's where imposter syndrome comes from, which a lot of people have.
Yeah. I think of like the self-awareness and the ability to get ourselves and other people. I mean, we can't get other people anywhere. I think that's my biggest curiosity at the currently is how I think of 29-year-old Tiff before she stepped in the boxing ring, when she stepped in the boxing ring and just wanted to, like the world was this place and I looked only at my strengths and I held on to those strengths because a part of me knew that those strengths came from trauma. But that part of me overrode the self-awareness and told such a strong story that it was that this is how I am, and this is what I kept my own self safe from the reality for a long time. And if someone had have come up to me before I'd stepped into the ring, before I'd started asking myself the right questions in order to open up to myself and realize what was underneath, no one could have told me, no one could have led me there. You could have seen in plain black and white what was going on with me, really, but I wouldn't have been ready to listen. How do people become ready to listen? How do we take this cognitive or logical awareness that, yeah, I had that happen as a kid. I know that. I knew that there had been this thing that happened as a kid, but there was also this part of my mind and awareness that said, actually, I've put that in a box and it didn't happen and it's stuffed somewhere and there's no feelings and emotions, and now we play a character. Like, how do we try and move through those places deliberately?
Yeah, I think first is to be kind to yourself. I think a lot of us have done it, which is to accept that we did what we needed to do to survive. We do what we do. If we need to give ourselves compassion so we don't wrong ourselves for that.
Yes.
But I think the minute we realize, I remember going to my first therapy session, and I'm not suggesting this is the best way, but I said to her, look, I've got shit to do. I've got to look after my kids. So I need you to stitch me up at the end of this session. I can't afford for you to just open me up crying here. I got a job to do. And I said that to her and she just started laughing. But it really was the truth. And what I did was I honored myself. I was open and honest. I told her why I was fearful of doing therapy. Because we've also seen in the movies how sometimes it appears that therapy can make you more vulnerable for attack. And if you're still doing the work, the last thing you want to do. So I think just being honest with whoever it is you're going to speak to, and ideally speak to someone who has been recommended, or, tell them, I need this to be a safe place and I need to feel okay at the end of this because I need to operate. Not knowing what your story is, but like you said, if you're going there and you're fighting in the ring, you don't want to be thinking about the other stuff. Or if you do, you want to be using it as fuel. But at some point, we're going to need to regulate. I read the book that Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Perry wrote, which is What Happened to You, as opposed to saying what's wrong with you, what happened to you. And one thing I picked up from reading that book was the whole regulation. Like I have quite a turbulent relationship with someone who's very close to me family-wise. And I find that when he's angry and I say, calm down, he completely loses his shit. As in, I think he blacks out.
Wow.
Whereas I'm actually saying it to really say, calm down, there's nothing. My intentions are different.
Yes.
But they said a dysregulated person will lose their shit with that. And so it's for me, but now that I'm doing the work, it means I can mirror and see what somebody else is going through. I'm working on being regulated. It doesn't mean I'm not triggered. I can still be triggered. So I think that's one thing, is that you still figure out what your triggers are. And I just now start to find ways to deal with it. That's one thing that can be done. There was something else I was going to say that can be done. I think the journey's forever. I mean, Maya Angelou, who I didn't even follow enough, but she said she learns every day till the day she dies. And the minute she said that, she gave me a license to say, I don't have to figure this out today, tomorrow, or in 10 years.
Yes.
Just keep going.
It's funny, when I started this podcast, and a lot of it tends to lean a lot into these types of conversations, because that's where it took me. I mean, it was the first place that I outwardly talked about my experience, kind of by mistake. And like you, I felt like I'd talked about it. I felt like I hadn't hit at it. But when it came out in a conversation, accidentally, really, the next few days I was like, oh, that was wow, I was still holding on to something that was heavy. But what I was going to say is, at the beginning, you know, I knew I had a lot I know a lot of stuff that I want to share with people, but there's been this complete flip where it's like, I don't want to be I don't want anyone to look at me like an expert. I want them to look at me like a lifelong student. I'm just curious, and I'm just pulling the world's best and smartest people. Smartest, I won't use that word. World's most learned person in front of me to ask questions and learn more. I don't want anyone to think that I think I'm an expert, because I'm not sure of even the stuff I'm sure of. I can't be certain about anymore, because the world is just changing, and everywhere you look, there's a new lens to look through, and there's new information, and there's proof for everything, depending on who you ask and how you look at it. Yeah. And I love that.
Agreed. And I think if I could give this to you, although I'm worried everyone's going to start, because, you know, everyone became a coach, and nothing wrong with that, because I think we're all coaches. It's just where we are in our learning journey, is even though I don't hold, like, I don't have a degree in psychology or therapy, I'm 100% I don't even put myself as an expert, because for you to be an expert, you need to be dead. I put myself as a thought leader. I'm a thought leader on, you know, especially when it comes to trauma, 100%, because I'm so dedicated to knowing more about it and speaking to people who know either more or different elements, of which having conversations with you. And I go out there and I lead on it. I lead on the conversation. I bring it to the table. I'm brave enough to bring it up. And I think we need to get to a position that we're okay with that. If you are speaking, and not everybody needs to speak about their story, some people don't want to, but if we choose to, we are leading on it. So gift yourself that.
I love that. I want to shine a light on these 4 very different businesses in very different industries that you're paving the way with. So you've got an engineering consultancy in Sydney. You run an F45 in London.
Yeah.
You're a transformational business. That's your brand, Yemi Penn. And a cafe in Sydney as well. Yemi, I love you. Wow.
Oh, I think it was the memo. The memo got me angry.
I'm doing everything everywhere.
Yeah, it got me angry. It to be honest, it did. It's funny, because you were talking about, and I don't know whether that was the point you're trying to make, but I'm conscious I hear things. I think you were talking about when you're getting ready for a fight and you'd go back and it was tied to your traumatic incident. And, you know, sometimes you're like, I'm going to do this. So for instance, I think there are a lot of really, 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 in particular, rich men, billionaires, who, to be really specific, were probably sexually abused or really physically abused. And one way they knew they could not be hurt again was by making lots of money. And so, and I know that because since putting my documentary out last year, I've had a number of people, men in particular, reach out to me who have shared that story. And even this is my take. I think I do get downloads. I do think there's a spiritual element, and I'm able to do that tie, but I believe there is. And sometimes I wonder whether that's what I am doing, or have done with my businesses.
Mm.
So know what I do here. Even though I might speak about other people, I think one thing I want to give people with is to always check yourself in as well. Because the minute you find yourself talking about somebody else is because it's got everything to do with you.
Yes. Yes.
And so when I look at those businesses, I wonder if that's it. And I think it's a bit of everything, but I'm okay with it because I want it to be regulated and to the right place. Now, don't get me wrong. The cafe I bought last year, would I do it again? No, I would not. It has kicked my ass.
Yeah.
But saying that, I don't regret it because it's all part of life lessons.
Yes.
I don't believe, for me, one box fits all. I don't. I mean, bloody hell, people go and they get that corporate job, and 1 minute they get their junior manager, senior manager, director, and they're managing lots of things. How's that any different to what I'm doing? The only difference is I get to be in control of what excites me. You've just been painted in it in a different way. So, yeah, to the memo. That's how I feel.
I love it. What is your take on fate and free will? What do you believe around that?
Oh my gosh. Tiffany, I should have looked you up. You asked them killer questions. Fate and free will. Okay. So I'm not as religious as I was raised. I do believe in God. I believe in a higher being. I just think a lot of it is within us as well. So some people get separated from that, and that's where the big issue is. But, I'm still on that journey. But I remember when I was at church, probably over a decade ago, and the Reverend said this so well. He said, and this was when we still had that sat nav GPS big block, and you'd put where your destination in, and there's a little bit of free will. And what he was saying was that you can go where you're going, but sometimes we do detours, which is where our free will goes in. We make a mistake, or we think we know better, and then we go off track, and that's when we end up in this real crazy circle. But the fate part of it eventually gets you back to that track. And it just stayed with me forever. So to answer your question, but that was a download I got, and which is why I love using my voice. I no longer have to worry about interviews because I am living my truth. I am as I am. And so what if I don't know, I would say it. So I guess for me, my view is that we have free will, but there's still a fate thing we signed up for in the previous life. We may or may not know it, but every time we do it, and I think for me, I just took a lot of different turns, which may have been fate as well, but eventually was going to get me back to that. And that's where the element of free will is.
That is the most satisfying answer that I've heard for that.
Really?
I love that. I love that because I often think if people believe in fate over free will completely, what it takes away from you is any drive to take charge. What's the point? What's the point?
Yes.
If it's all predetermined, then I am just going to be what I am. So I'll sit back on the couch and whatever. So I love that. I love the idea of that, and I do believe that there is some form of a higher purpose, and I don't know. I have this experience with setting intentions where if I set an intention and I'm quite clear and feel quite deeply about it, and then if I take action, within no time, something falls in my lap from left field. And I've always found that weird, but it's every time I feel really passionate about something and I go and because I'm an action taker, I'll go and I'll start and I'll hit a brick wall and be like, oh, that's not going to work. And then I'll look over my shoulder and something just falls from the sky and lands in my lap. And I'm like, where the hell did that come from? And how now? And why now? And I can't ignore that. I can't ever ignore that. And it happens too often.
Yes.
And so that kind of fits, I feel
you must be a serial manifester. You must be manifesting all sorts of stuff.
I do feel that I manifest a lot, but I also feel sometimes I'm chaotic with my focus and attention, and and how much of that can you control and sit back but yeah, I definitely, there's been too many times when the things that really matter, that I know that I'm really bought into, will come when I want them to, and it's you know, you can't, like, I can't ignore that fact. So I'm not all woo-woo, oh, just fucking write it in your gratitude journal tonight and tomorrow you'll wake up with a BMW in your driveway. Like, that shit, that doesn't work. But in saying so, there's been, I mean, I could tell a handful of stories where I'm like, there's no explanation apart from the fact that there is an element of this that exists. Which is really cool. Tell me the hardest thing about the cafe. What was the thing that you didn't expect to be difficult that is the most challenging about it?
Firstly, how people make money. You know, so firstly, I went out and spoke to lots of people, and there were two things they said would be a challenge: staff turnover and making money the honorable way. Now, honorable way being that, and I still don't even think I fully know, GST on certain foods and non-certain foods. You pay for so much, but there's no guarantee because things change. And so the hospitality industry is really one made out of love, unless you are going to have lots of businesses. And I have no problem with that because it was born out of love. You know, I opened up that cafe. A big reason why I bought it then was because when the George Floyd things were happening, I went into, I was triggered immensely. And I did what I do best, which was, okay, you're in pain, feel the pain, but how are we going to turn it to power? And the first thing that came up to me is, well, I want to build something that's on the front line. Like my business, my consultancy is kind of behind the scenes. People know me in the industry, but I want people to be able to come into a cafe to see diversity, to see richness in difference. And food has always been the thing. Food, sport, and music always brings people together. And the cafes was one thing that seemed to be doing well during COVID, hence why I took the risk to do it during COVID. So it was always passion, but I didn't realize how big of how you need to do some real savvy stuff outside of the food industry to make money. And then the other hard thing was the turnover. So staff turnover in the hospitality industry is high. And then coupled with COVID, that where we typically relied on international students who had to go back home because their visas ran out and they could no longer afford, it was painful. But we're in a really good place. I mean, we got featured on Channel 7 News a couple of weeks ago, which was awesome, because we were not going to qualify for government support, and we have. And so now I'm sitting here thinking, maybe this is where I was meant to open it up. I don't know. I'm still learning. At the moment, I kind of get guided to do something. I can't explain it to anybody else, including my partner, but it makes sense to me.
I love it how that we will sit back at one point and you'll see the very clear reason, the very clear lesson, or the very clear direction that it opened up. And that's one thing that really helps me when I'm doing things is, I know, you know, when I started this podcast, I wanted two things. One, I wanted to improve my communication skills. I love doing speaking and events. I didn't do a lot of it before. I did enough, but I wanted to be a lot better at it because I knew it was where I wanted to be. So I saw an opportunity to do that. The other thing was to network at a higher level. I started through the pandemic working with Victorian ambulance paramedics, doing a health and wellness, Zooming in and doing that online. As part of that, started doing Feel Good Friday talks and went, I've got a platform where I can host these conversations, and it feels a little bit podcasty, and that planted the podcast seed. And, you know, it just, doors opened, and it's been amazing. And as I keep doing it, you know, it's a lot. I do 4 shows a week. And then I co-host another show where I do about 4 a week. So I'm sitting on 8 conversations. I'm seeking out 8 guests a week. I'm speaking to the best in the business. And it's a lot of work for the least of my income streams. It's the most work, least income. But I know that it's building skill sets, it's opening doors, it's creating opportunities, and it's making me receptive when those opportunities come. I see them.
Absolutely.
I see them, and I wouldn't see them if I wasn't doing it.
Absolutely. Damn, so good. That's and that's what a lot of people miss. They automatically assume that if I cannot if I cannot get the immediate reward from this, then what's the point? But you have to be in it to see it. So good, Tiffanee. That's so good. So good.
Tell me about your other businesses. What's your favourite one? Do you have a favourite? Or do they all have very different purposes?
I have a favourite, but it's the one that doesn't bring the most money in.
Which one is it?
Oh my God. It's the stuff I'm doing on trauma at the moment. Yeah. You know, it's not it, and I know it will at some point, but it's not the focus. You know, it's like what you said you're doing and similar. So I think maybe that's why I said so good. I got so into that. Yeah. Because the trauma stuff that I've been doing, which would have really kicked off when I started the documentary, I'm about to launch a YouTube channel with a co-host in a couple of weeks about healing trauma, and then about to do another mini series. All of this requires money from me. And I'm now currently going through a fundraising to get a bit more support because, you know, my guys keep on telling me you can get support. This is a global problem, not a Yemi problem. But it's the stuff I'm doing on healing our trauma is it's so rewarding. I mean, I'm thankfully quite a positive person, but when I wake up every day knowing that I'm going to do a bit of that, it makes me feel so good. When I had, you know, I'm an ex-military dependent. So my ex-husband was military. I was in Okinawa on a US Air Force bases, you know, at some point in my life. And there's this lady who I remember meeting, and I just admired her so much. And she messaged me on Facebook, said, Yemi, your posts have changed my life. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been like fangirling you and everything. And what I'm saying is making a difference for you. And I love that. Can you imagine you doing these shows and you are reaching people? Yeah. It's the sweetest thing ever. So the work under the Yemi Penn banner is what I love, and especially on the trauma stuff.
I love that. I often talk about one of my favourite parts of it all is, and we don't get to see it. We don't get, and it, so there's no ego in it because we actually don't even get to see it. But it's the ripple effect of what we're doing. It's when I let my mind ponder. I think of Craig Harper is who I also produce shows for. I followed him for years. He was a mentor of mine. He had a huge impact on feeding my mind what I wanted it to be fed. I would volunteer to crew at his events for a few years. And in 2017, I said, this is one of those things. This is one of those stories. 2017, I left a coaching session with him. And in my head, I said to nobody, but in my head, but I meant it, I'm going to work with that guy one day. I'm going to be a part of his team. Now, he doesn't have a team. He has one business partner, Melissa, that runs his life and works with him. No staff. Everyone else, we crew for voluntary if we want to be involved. And in October, he rang me up and he said, I want you to co-host and produce a show a week. And by early this year, he said, I want you to officially join our team with the U Project. And I was like, wow. So what he exposed me to and how he changed me from this person who had no voice, who had little self-confidence, who had that imposter syndrome, but thought that keeps you bound to what you are, to realize that from what I learned from him, that I grew and I took chances and I put myself in positions and now I speak and now I pull people like yourself in and I let thousands of people across the globe hear this conversation, and this conversation will change somebody's life, and from that they will have a journey like I did where they go from TIFF version 1.0 to TIFF version 2, 3 and 4, and that changes the world.
It does, man. I don't know much about your story, but I'm so intrigued, and it might be that I get you to come onto my podcast.
Well, I'm gonna send you one of my episodes, episode 168, because you mentioned Bruce Perry's book. Episode 168, one of my guests referred a guest to me, Dr. Bill Saunders, a clinical psychologist. He'd be great for your show. He was very well received. We did this podcast. He's written a book called What Happened, same as Bruce Perry, same topic. And released around the same time. And so I got him on to talk about mental health, and by halfway through it evolved into a therapy session, and a very, for me, quite confronting one. I normally have an episode uploaded within a week. It took me 2 weeks to open the file to edit it, and it took me another 2 to listen to it a few times and actually put it out into the world. And it was amazing. Again, amazing. That was the episode that people reached out about. They would reach out and say, God, that you could have been talking about me. Wow. And I just went, it's those moments. It's amazing.
Wow. I got to thank you for what you do. And I know you probably know this, but it's important to hear it because I know the importance for me. People completely underestimate the selflessness that it takes to do something like this. People assume that sometimes we just want to hear our own voice. Maybe we do to a certain extent, but we want to make you feel better. We want you to be able to use your voice as well. I sleep easier when I know people like yourself are out here just having those conversations. I really do. So thank you.
Oh, you're amazing. I'm going to cut this piece out and I'm going to play it to myself every night. Yemi Penn said this to me. Hey, Yemi,
Hilarious.
what's your documentary that you've spoke about a few times? What are your books? Where can people follow you on social media? How can they watch your TED Talk? And what else do you do that I haven't even touched on?
I know there is one big one. So I released a short documentary last year. It's on my YouTube channel. If you just put Yemi Penn in, which is Penn. It's titled, Did I Choose My Trauma? And I ask people to just sit with that topic for a second and see what comes up for you, because it's going to be individual to everybody. But I wrote it because I want to understand from an empowering place why. And that's why I asked that question. So it's titled, Did I Choose My Trauma? That was released last year. We're currently working on putting a feature-length documentary, which is now going to be changed. I still need to work on the title, but it's basically, do we choose the experience our trauma teaches us? I really want the whole global collective to say, what we went through was hard as hell. And I want to acknowledge my pain, but what experience, what am I going to learn from this that I'm going to take back? And then how am I going to contribute to try and make sure nobody else goes through it? That's what this new documentary is. And that's a real big call for humanity, because I can't fund that one on my own. I funded the others. This one will require a lot more work. And we're just asking people kindly to donate $1, $10. It's more than the money. It's more the vibration. When we've got a collective vibration on a mission to say, let's talk about what we went through and let's find out how we can learn from it and be better and stop it. That's good enough. But that they can, if they go onto my website, they'll see more details on there. It's on Documentary Australia Foundation. My book, Did You Get the Memo? Because I effing didn't. It's on most outlet stores online, because I really didn't. And look, the only other thing, Instagram is my gig. If you really want to get as close to me as possible, because if I'm not singing one day, I'm dancing the other, and then the next day I'm really telling you to look at your shit. So it does change. But Instagram, Yemi Penn is my handle, yemi.penn. But what I'm really hoping more than anything, if I connect with people, is I start my PhD in October. I finally decided to do it.
What are you researching?
Ancient modalities on healing trauma, baby. We need to go back. We're trying to reinvent the wheel. We are on sacred land here in Australia, and I'm just 4 years of going into different cultures and saying, what did you do when someone died? How did you get through it? What did you do when someone had what we now call cancer? What did you do when one of your elders completely abused their power? And I want to get in. I want to go in. Yeah. Time to academize this. Yeah. So I'm so excited. I'm excited. I've managed to convince them, the university. I'll be going to La Trobe University in Melbourne. So might be seeing you.
Definitely.
I know,
shout
I
out.
will.
I'm coming to have coffee with you. I want to meet you.
Yes. You heard that first, people. She said she's coming to meet me, so I'm gonna hold you to that.
True story. Oh,
true story.
So
that's me.
That's amazing. I cannot thank you enough. I love this. I know that you're going to have a lot of supporters from this podcast because I talk about this rot a lot, and I think it's really important. Thank you. Before you go, I was going to say, as you were saying that about your book, the topic of your book, a recent episode I had with Mark Devine, who's the SEAL Fit former Navy SEAL, one of the
Oh,
top,
yes.
yeah, amazing. And of course, we touched on trauma straight up, so I burrowed down into that with him. And one thing he said that had a huge impact on me and the way I felt was, he said, if you want to get really spiritual about it, you want to get really crazy spiritual, it is my belief that we choose, our spirit chooses our parents, so that we choose that trauma so that we get our lesson. And it was just a timely snippet of a conversation that sat with me. So I love that.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. That's what my documentary invites people to explore. It's a big ask. And so I want people to come on the journey to figure out, why would we ever do that? And I get it, but I'm with Mark on that one.
Yeah. Oh, give her a follow, guys. Give her a follow. Thank you so much, Yemi.
Thank you.